Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, everybody, and today we're going to be doing a little something different. We're actually going to be learning about how and in which ways Craftworld Eldar can kind of compete against Harlequins, who are kind of dominating the meta right now. So I know it's a little of a weird thing to think about how Craftworld Eldar can go against Harlequins, because they're very similar factions and they're in the same book. But especially in the tournament scene, if something is dominating as much as it is, and you're going to try to bring something else, you're going to probably face a mirror match of some kind, even if you were bringing other Harlequins. So how can Craftworld Eldar counter Harlequins on the competitive scene and kind of, I guess, bridge the gap between the win rates of Harlequins and Craftworld Eldar factions? And I think this is going to kind of be, until there's a fix, and GW has said that there's going to be a few tweaks with Harlequins. Until there's a fix, I don't think Craftworld Eldar as a whole are going to be super successful at dealing with their, funny cousins. But the problem is that, while we're waiting for this fix, we still have to face these guys. And there's a few ways that I found are good and effective at dealing with Harlequins. And, these aren't surefire ways. They're not going to guarantee a win, but they will, at the very least, make the games a lot closer and force your opponent to do things that, might have to require more effort. So, for example, he might have to shoot at targets that are not optimal for him, or he may have to move in a different way to be able to counter your units that you bring. So let's go into that, and we're going to be talking about, a couple units that are good versus Harlequins in the Craftworld Eldar. And the key to this, though, is we don't want to just say, okay, just spam units that are good against Harlequins, because that would be tailoring and that wouldn't be effective in tournaments in an all-comers list. So we're going to be looking at ways to, incorporate units that are effective against Harlequins, but also effective against a broad range of enemies that you might face. So first of all, we kind of have to address why pure Harlequin lists that are, dominating tournaments right now are really good against Craftworld Eldar lists. And I think what it comes down to is three main things. And the first one is that, Harlequins all have a base 4+ invul save, which is across the board better than what we have as Craftworld Eldar, basically. And here's why. With our armor saves, if we have a 3+, if we have a unit with a 3+ armor save, chances are weaponry is going to reduce that to a 4+, or even sometimes a 5+ anyway. So we're not really going to get much of a benefit from having a 3+ armor save. On the other hand, Harlequins have an invul save of 4+, which can never be reduced. And a lot of our weapons are high EP weapons that would tear through armor. So Harlequins don't really care about that too much. And most of the ranged weapons in our list are fairly short range. We did get a buff on some of the ranges on some of the weapons. For example, shuriken catapults are upgraded to 18 inches. But the problem with that is Harlequins have Shadow Seers, which negate 6 inches off their range. So, if we want to target a squad of a troop squad, we need to be within 12 of that unit. And some of our units are going to need to be within 6 inches. Which, when you consider a lot of our units that are powerful against Harlequin units, like warp spiders, stuff like that, would need to be within 6 inches. Well, they're not going to be in range if they use sudden assault, because sudden assault says you have to be outside of 9 inches. So this is going to throw a wrench into a lot of our alpha strike options and going to make it very hard for us to actually deal with those units. And the Harlequins are going to get the first strike. And when Harlequins get the first strike, they strike hard and they don't let you back up. And that's simply because Harlequin units are faster than ours in general. They hit harder in combat, much harder. And they have a lot of the same access to movement, deployment shenanigans that we have. So, they can still use the Phantasm ability. We redeploy units to one side of the board. They can use it too in response. So, honestly, in a lot of ways, they can counter us, and then they can still strike first because they are faster and harder hitting. So if that's the case, how do we deal with Harlequin armies? How can we as Craftworld Eldar players, facing the dark jesters of 40K, how can we deal with them without specifically tailoring our lists? Because as you're all sure, I'm sure you guys are all aware of this, tailored lists are easy to do because you know what you're fighting against beforehand. You can easily tailor your list before the game, and you can be very effective against that army. Now, that's not what I'm talking about because everybody could do that, right? There's no strategy involved in that. That's just, I'm going to take units that I know are good against you, and you're going to be at a disadvantage because of that. But in tournaments, you can't do that. If you tailor your list to be good against Harlequins, you might suffer greatly against, Dark Angels or, all sorts of other lists that are out there. So you have to be careful in competitive play with list tailoring because you never know what you're going to fight against. And if you tailor your list against Harlequins, I guarantee you're going to have an insanely hard matchup against units like Death Guard. Things like that have really good toughness, really good armor save. You're going to be struggling against those enemies. So let's talk about ways in which we can deal with Harlequin lists, but still retain a lot of options against other armies that you might come across in tournaments and competitive play. So one of the units that stands out to me that has been kind of a little bit overlooked, but is very good at objectives, very good against dealing with a lot of different enemies that you might face in tournaments, is Swooping Hawks. So the reason why Swooping Hawks are awesome is because they have a really good range. They have a 24-inch range, and it's easy for them to get within 18 inches because they have Sky Leap and Sudden Assault. They have a high volume of shots, and they auto-wound on 6s to hit. And these auto wounds are going to get past that pesky -1 to wound thing that some Harlequins have because of the Shadow Seers, the aura of the Shadow Seers anyway. And because they're a high volume of shots, the 4+ invul save and the -1 to hit that most Harlequin units are going to have is going to be greatly negated to the point where you're still going to be shooting at a high volume and you're still going to be killing a lot of clowns when you hit them. And then, normally, this would be a 1-for-1 trade. You would shoot your Swooping Hawks at the enemy unit, a lot of, clowns would die, then they would kill you in return. But because Swooping Hawks have Sky Leap, they can reposition themselves out of harm's way, contest objectives, capture objectives, score points, and at the same time, remain safe from retaliation. So, the last thing that Swooping Hawks are pretty good at is being an effective unit against a broad range of enemies. They have uses against almost all the, kind of armies that are out there in competitive play right now. And what that means is that you can comfortably field Swooping Hawks and use them as a counter to Harlequins, but also utilize them against different types of armies that you might come across in tournaments effectively, so they're not essentially a point sink against other types of opponents that you might go against. So in addition, we do have some decent units against Harlequins, and these units are Striking Scorpions, Dire Avengers, and Fire Prisms. So really quick, Striking Scorpions are good because they have a large multitude of attacks. If you're able to get them into combat, now it does take some strategy to be able to, kind of engage a unit of Harlequins without them pulling some sort of shenanigan on you. But if Striking Scorpions are able to engage, they will absolutely rip apart anything they come across. And this includes Void Reavers. They actually do have the damage to considerably damage and rip out Void Reavers if they're taken in large enough numbers, and if you're able to get into an assault with them. I realize this might be a little difficult, but Eldar do have a lot of ways of helping units get into assault. You have Ghost Walk, you have the Headstrong, stratagem. So there's a lot of ways in which you can actually get these guys into combat. Dire Avengers are another unit that's great against Harlequins. And they're also good against a lot of other targets. And again, the reason why they're good against Harlequins is because they have a large multitude of fire. They have a decent range. 18 inches is difficult to get into range of, but Dire Avengers have the mobility to do this, and they can take out a lot of different targets with it. And they do have abilities that allow them to auto-wound, especially if you have the Hail of Doom Craftworld trait. So Dire Avengers are another excellent choice for this. And lastly, we have Fire Prisms. And fire prisms are effective because they basically allow you to activate a stratagem called Linked Fire, which allows them to ignore invul saves. So if you got 3 of them, or even just 2 of them, by the way, linking their fire and shooting at a unit of Void Reavers, chances are, if you roll average and you have a couple of buffs on your side, those Void Reavers are going to be absolutely wrecked by the end of the turn. They are really not going to be able to stand a chance. So with the Linked Fire stratagem, it can be really effective at taking down these Void Reavers because most likely they're going to be in a position, a hard to reach position. Fire Prisms have the mobility to get good angles on those targets and eliminate them. And the last thing here is going to be Falcons. I didn't mention this here really. I didn't put this down, but Falcons are great because they have the ability to deep strike a unit in with the Cloud Strike special rule. And that allows units that normally wouldn't be able to get into an assault, like, AKA Striking Scorpions, units like that, to have a better chance at doing so. So Falcons also get an honorable mention as well because they have heavy weapons that have a great range and they can do quite a bit of damage themselves. Pulse lasers are no joke. A pulse laser can easily eliminate a Void Reaver by the time it comes in, not to mention their other weapons. Now, some of the weaker units versus Harlequins are units with very short range or that are very slow. So unfortunately, Fire Dragons and Warp Spiders, they have a decent speed, but the problem with them is that their ranged weapons are so low range, they can easily be, reduced by psychic powers and by the -6 to range modifier that Harlequins can give their units. So it won't always be the case. I mean, there are ways to kind of get rid of that, so to speak, but it's extremely hard to do, especially with the luck rerolls. Most Harlequin players are going to be able to get off their psychic powers and are just, to be honest with you, going to be able to, they're going to be able to get their stuff off, and they're going to be strategic about where they place their units so that their Void Reavers are protected because those are the most valuable units in their army. Now, Wraith units are just much too slow. They require a lot of extra space and transports, and they're just honestly almost never going to be able to get into an assault with them. Furthermore, Wraith units ignore a lot of armor, and honestly, Harlequins don't care about that. So a lot of your damage is going to be wasted, and because you pay such a premium point for a Wraith Guard, you're not going to be trading well with any Harlequin units at all. So in conclusion, the things that are effective, the most effective against Harlequins are units with a high amount of attacks, high volume of attacks, have a lot of range, and potentially things that can ignore invul saves, and mobility. So if you have those in a unit, that unit's going to be pretty effective at countering Harlequins. However, the weaker units are going to be units that are, a little bit slower, have a short range, or have a low volume of attacks in general. So I'm really hoping GW addresses the balance issues with Harlequins. I just think their stats are a little too overpumped. Their units are a little too effective at dealing with any kind of target. And whenever you have a mixture like that, it's absolutely deadly to basically all tournament play and basically shuts out the rest of the competition. When an army or a faction has little to no weaknesses and just a lot of strengths, that army is always going to basically overperform. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. I haven't put a video out in a few days. I've been wrapped up with other stuff, real life stuff. So I appreciate you guys watching it, those of you who do. And hope you guys learned something from this video. I actually plan to play test against a few Harlequin lists myself pretty soon. So hopefully in the future, I'll let you guys know about how that went and if those units were really that effective against it. On paper, they are, but you never know. Sometimes in battle, it's different. And of course, like always, the dice gods can be fickle. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I will see you guys in the next video and have a great one. See you, everybody.